Thank you for joining us for this panel, Using EdTech Effectively, Balancing Student Learning, Wellness, and Data Privacy. We are thrilled to have you here this morning for this discussion. Schools, of course, are on the front lines of experiencing the effects of technology on children, both in terms of the student's personal experience, but also frequently they are called upon to be the solution to some of the challenges that our youth face in not only the use of education technology for teaching and learning, but outside of the school and the school campus. So we are thrilled today to have three panelists who will kind of reflect on the challenge that schools face in balancing the advantages of using technology for teaching and learning, but certainly all of the consequences we have talked a lot about over the last couple of days, including some of the policy challenges we heard yesterday from Senator Blumenthal and some of our other champions on Capitol Hill. So I am fortunate to introduce three panelists that are working on different but all very important elements of this conversation in both the school setting and beyond for students. First, to my left, your right, Elizabeth Laird, Director of Equity in Civic Technology at the Center for Democracy and Technology. And we are very lucky that just this week, CDT has released some new survey results that I think will be of interest to the audience and that Liz will be talking about. To my right and to most of your lefts, Tamara Sobel, she's a national advisor for health and media literacy for Media Literacy Now. And next to Tamara, Peter Fagen, partner at Fagen, Friedman, and Fulfrost, one of the leading public education law firms in the state of California and in a number of other jurisdictions across the country. I think we got a taste, if you were in the last session, about advertising, about the increasingly important role that litigation plays in this space, but also Peter is frequently consulting, as are his partners, school districts in the myriad issues that are associated with the use of EdTech in schools and beyond. So I've asked each of the panelists to make some introductory remarks, and then we'll have a few minutes of moderated Q&A and then some Q&A from all of you at the end. So I'm going to start with Elizabeth.
Great. I need
that.
Let's see. Oh, there we go. Oh. Okay, now I can actually exhale that my slides showed up, which always is scary as a panelist. Thank you for that introduction. Now, I'm not going to insinuate that talking about student privacy on a Friday morning heading into your weekend isn't the most riveting discussion that you will have all week, but just in case, and I didn't give my panelists a heads up about this, I think I'm going to make my remarks interactive. Is that cool with y'all? You down? Okay. So as Reg said, we released some research this week. So given we're talking about education, we're gonna have a pop quiz. So I am going to ask y'all some questions, and then I will reveal the answer in terms of what our research actually shows. Sound good? Okay, so the first two questions, you're gonna do thumbs up if you think the number has increased over last year. You're gonna do this if you think it stayed the same, and you're gonna do thumbs down if you think it's gone down. Okay? All right, first question. Without further ado, so with student privacy concerns, do you think that concerns among parents and students have gone up, stayed the same, or gone down since last year? Write it down, stay the same, stay the same. Okay, for those of you who did this, you were right. So the research that we released, there we go. It's always a moment of panic. Will the slide advance? Shows that student privacy concerns among parents and students have gone up. And this is especially stark among parents. We saw them report a 12 percentage point increase in their concerns about the protections that schools are employing when they are in the custody of their child's data. This is the fourth year that we've done this, so this is not something that we've seen every year. In fact, this is actually quite remarkable. And among students, we also saw a 5 percentage point increase. So we see the folks who are not making decisions are actually becoming more concerned about the way that data and technology is used. That concern is disproportionately high among students with disabilities as well as their families. And this could in part be driven by the fact that 1 in 5 parents say that their school has notified them of a data breach. And so if your school is notifying you about them having a data breach, you are also more concerned about the privacy of that data. All right, now we're going to talk about teachers. So same question, do we think that concerns about student privacy among teachers has gone up, stayed the same, or gone down? Okay, mixed bag. All right, for those of you who had your thumb down, you would be right. So while we see parent and student concerns about student privacy going up, interestingly, we actually see concerns among teachers going down. And they are, in fact, at their lowest level since 2021. And we've also been tracking how many teachers have received substantive training on student privacy. And since we started the survey, each year we see a little bump, and we say, yay, way to support teacher schools. And this year, we actually saw it stay flat. So for those of you who have been working in this field for a while, these are the ingredients for when you start to see backlash. When you see more concerns among users, they actually have less autonomy and less of a say, and you see the institutions that are working with them just not paying attention and not keeping their foot on the gas in terms of improving their protections at the same rate that technologies are expanding. So I'm only going to do deep dives into 3 technologies today, but if you go to our report, which is on our website, cdt.org, we asked about all kinds of technology. We asked about facial recognition technology, about predictive analytics, about remote proctoring software, and one of the findings was that none of these were 0. So even like what I actually did when I was thinking about the questions is I was like, where have I seen some of the most outrageous examples of the use of data and technology in schools? And let's just see what teachers say. None of them were 0. For the most part, they were at least a third, if not higher, including using data to predict who might commit a crime. Okay, so I am going to do deep dives into 3 technologies, which I will do quickly because our moderator was very clear about time limits. The first is filtering and monitoring software. The second is filtering and blocking software. Second is student activity monitoring software. And third, I don't know if y'all have heard about this technology. It's been pretty under the radar, generative AI. Anybody? Okay. All right, well, I have good news. I have data about that. I'm going to end the quiz portion just because I think I'll start to get dirty looks from Reg if I keep taking up so much time. But we asked about filtering and blocking software, which can be powered by AI. It's not always, but it can be driven by AI. And 98% of teachers say that their school uses this software. And if you're familiar with it, you may not be surprised by that because in the early 2000s, there was a law passed called the Children's Internet Protection Act. And as a condition of receiving federal funding, schools have to comply with it. And one of the requirements of that law is that they block online access to content that could be harmful to minors. What I suspect, if you are familiar with that, you might be surprised by is that 71% of students say this technology has gone too far, and it's actually prevented them from completing school assignments. And LGBTQ+ students are more likely to report that being an issue for them. And we share this with school leaders. They're like, they just hate filtering and blocking. Students would just say anything to have unfettered access to content. And when we asked teachers the same thing, 57% said that this is an issue. So this is not just something of students hating barriers to them being able to freely access content. And then last, and perhaps even more troubling, we had heard anecdotally that this filtering and blocking was being used to impose value-laden, subjective restrictions to accessing content in the same way that we're hearing this play out in school libraries. And so we asked teachers, do you think your school is more likely to block content related to LGBTQ+ students and students of color? And a third of teachers said that yes, they do believe that their school does that. And it's higher among teachers in Title I schools that are serving lower income families as well as licensed special education teachers. So one of our findings was that there is a digital book ban playing out that no one has visibility into. Only 27% of parents have ever been asked for their opinion on these things. And it's different than in a school library where you see a book on the shelf or not. There's no visibility into what students are blocking online. Next, so student activity monitoring software. I was just over at the Department of Ed this morning presenting on this. And I said, what percentage of, because I have more time, what percentage of you all think that Schools are monitoring what students are doing online. And this is like a pretty savvy crowd. Like this is what they do, is by the Office of EdTech. Like, we think it's a lot, like 40%. I'm like, well, it's actually double that. So 88% of teachers say that their school monitors what students are doing online. That can be anything from their logging into applications to actually using AI and natural language processing to scan documents and messages for keywords, all the way to enabling real-time access to what students are doing online. Perhaps this is surprising, I don't know, but this is the second year we've really looked deeply into this, and we found that the troubling trends that we saw last year have unfortunately continued this year. So oftentimes the software is presented as keeping students safe, so safe from harming themselves or harming others. And what we find is actually far more common is that they're getting in trouble. So 67% of teachers say that they know of a student who's gotten in trouble, and not just because of the alert itself, but also because of the way that the school is handling it, and that the way that they confront students actually catalyzes and elicits the type of behavior that they then get in trouble for. And parents are out of the loop. If there's one thing you take away, it's that parents are not at the table, they're not read in, they don't know that this is happening. In addition to that, 38% of teachers say that whose school uses this technology say they know of a student who's been contacted by law enforcement because of this. So in the same way we're having conversations about the role of law enforcement on school campuses, this is inviting them in a digital way. And finally, actually this is on my last slide. So perhaps unsurprisingly, in the same way we're seeing parent concerns about student privacy go up, we're also seeing their support of this technology go down. And that is a difference. When we first started surveying, it was this feeling of like, we'll do anything to keep students safe. Take our data, take our privacy, and now that they're starting to see that these are actually safety issues in a different way, we're seeing that support go down. This is where I was gonna scoot myself. So another unfortunate consequence of this technology is that students are being outed because of it. And that has actually gone up 6 percentage points since last year. So 1 in 5 students know of a student who's been outed because of this technology. And LGBTQ+ students are not only being outed, they're also more likely to get in trouble because of this technology. And so also, perhaps not surprisingly, as we've seen student concerns about privacy go up, we also see their support for this technology go down. See, I'm doing along with y'all. All right, and then finally, the last set of data that I'll throw at you is about generative AI. 58% of students say that they've used it in the past year, which maybe sounds like a lot. I think what's surprising, though, is that a lot of them are using it for personal reasons. So there's this perception that they're using it to cheat and submit papers, and most of them aren't. Only 19% of students said that they've ever done that. And this is anonymous. There's no, unless your parent is like looking over your shoulder, they have no reason to misrepresent what they're doing. And students with disabilities are even more likely to use generative AI. Only fewer than half of teachers have received any substantive training on generative AI, and only a quarter have received guidance on what to do if they suspect a student of cheating, but that has not stopped them from disciplining students. So half of teachers say they know a student who's gotten in trouble because of this technology, and licensed special education teachers, probably no one's surprised given their students are more likely to use it, are also more likely to report that their students have gotten in trouble due to the use of this technology. The last thing I'll say before I'm not going to make eye contact with you. The last thing I'll say is that what I hope we can talk about is if the groups of students I'm talking about sound familiar, it's because they are protected classes of students. Students are protected by race and by sex and by disability. And so in addition to this research, we also released legal research, which is 40 pages, which I will definitely not read, Reg, and talking about what would it look like to apply existing civil rights protections to the uses of data and technology so we protect students online in the same way that we're required to protect them in the classroom. That's it.
Terrific. I am confident that my online profile with advertisers does not suggest that I'm a severe moderator of some kind, but I promise.
Well, it was so private I couldn't access it, so I didn't know.
No, I appreciate it. That was perfect. That was perfect. Thank you. So I mentioned at the beginning, right, we have schools, right, tasked with monitoring now, with online safety as a result of federal laws and local practices. They are also increasingly, right, as they are in many areas, called upon to be a source of information and help to both students and their families. So we're going to transition now to Tamara Sobel, who's going to talk a little bit about media literacy.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Okay, so I'm with Media Literacy Now, and we are a nonprofit national organization, nonpartisan as well, and we're advocating for media literacy education in every state, in every district, in every school. As many of you know, education policy in this country is generally local and state. Federal policy and legislation is a bit harder to do, and there are lots of philosophical reasons talking about that, where policy gets changed, but for the moment and historically, we're doing state-by-state advocacy for policy and legislation. And that means not just legislation, but helping education boards set standards that are modernized and updated for our digital age. And surprisingly, so many standards and frameworks in whether it's social sciences and civics, whether it's science, whether it's health education, and that's my particular focus, are really old and really haven't caught up to the digital age. And a big part of our mission is to change that. So a little bit about our organization. We were founded 10 years ago by a journalist and a parent who was very concerned over what she was seeing with her kids and what they weren't learning in school. She realized that it's a matter of policy, that it had to be changed on a policy level. So ever since then, we've been working in states across the country. We now work in close to 20 states, with grassroots activists that help change policy in their state. And our goal is so media literacy education is accepted as an essential element in K through 12 education. We talk about the term media literacy. I know many of you probably do know the term. There are many terms that relate to similar or different things, overlapping. I'll just talk about the definition. A broad definition is critical thinking and decision-making around all media. That includes social media, apps, advertising, entertainment, music, news, websites, and probably a lot more that's not included in that paragraph. Having skills to evaluate the credibility of information, the source, the perspective, potential bias, and the impact and influence on us, particularly children. The other terms that we hear a lot are digital citizenship and digital wellness. And digital citizenship generally refers to being responsible, respectful, and safe online. Digital wellness often refers to the healthy and intentional use of media, healthy in the mental health sense and in the physical health sense. And some of the things that you're likely to see in a media literacy instruction is using media mindfully, spotting what's unrealistic, looking at how you can be manipulated, looking at privacy issues, looking at the financial motives of the people providing the content to you, news literacy, cross-checking, referencing sources, again, privacy, and many other things. That's just some of the things. And of course, AI, we heard a lot about this morning. That is obviously part of the current and emerging technology, and media literacy skills will be, I believe, very useful in how we're looking at that emerging technology. The need for media literacy education, we believe it's vast. Somebody referenced the Stanford studies of 2016, which showed that a large majority of students really couldn't tell the difference between what was news and what was advertising, which is troubling, and that relates also to the digital marketing talk we had earlier. There really is a low proportion of young people at this point in time who really have the adequate skills they need to know what's true and what's not, to know how they're being influenced, and to know the financial motives of what's being pushed at them. There's some research that was just done at the Wellesley Centers about what teachers and administrators and librarians are teaching at this point in time. There's really not enough research on how much media literacy is being taught at the moment. But one of the stats from their studies said that teachers and librarians were discussing digital wellness and digital citizenship principles roughly 50% of the time. Parents were focusing on different things in the home. So it really is, as one of the other panelists said, a multimodal problem and need for intervention at home, in schools, in the community, really in many places. And 84% of parents, adults surveyed, said that yes, they believe we really need to have media literacy education being taught in a much larger way. Media Literacy Now does many things to achieve our goal. We support policymakers by providing some research. We provide model bills. We have grassroots activists, as I said, in roughly 20 states, and are always looking for more. We develop model policies. We build coalitions to help support our goals. We build public awareness through speaking and all sorts of things. And we do research. We have a state-by-state policy report on this kind of the state of the states, as far as how states are addressing media literacy, which states are doing great. And year by year, there are just more and more states that are trying to address it in policy in some ways, whether it's encouraging more professional development, whether it's updating their state standards, whether it's actually passing legislation. So there are many ways to go about achieving the policy goals. And we have a great report that yearly that will tell you if you're interested in what states are doing what. And roughly just, I think, in the past year, I think it was 50% of states, legislators and their state legislators have introduced some sort of policy measure on social media, health and wellness, or media literacy skills or something. So it's a hot topic. Okay, and just last but not least, here's our, sorry, did I change that? Nope. Oh, I'm behind, sorry. Am I going?
We have to aim it.
Oh, here, I'll aim it for you.
Keep going?
Oh.
Sorry, I wasn't keeping track. I was doing it on
Is that where you want to be?
Yeah, the end. Yeah, and that's the state-by-state map, and you can find that on our website as well and in the policy report. And any other info, please feel free to look at our website and our social media, or contact our info, or find me at some point. Thank you.
So we're, now fortunate to have a little bit different perspective on this work. And I think if you were in the last session again about advertising, you heard a little bit about, the litigation in the tobacco advertising space. We're going to hear a little bit from Peter about an emerging lawsuit in the social media space that I think will be of interest to you, and some other recent court decisions. But Peter and his team, find themselves on the kind of front lines of these conversations as districts really wrestle with the data privacy concerns that Liz highlighted at the beginning, and the civil rights challenges, questions about how schools can effectively engage in things like media literacy and other professional development and communications with families. And so when administrators have questions about what they're obligated to do under state and local policy, certainly, but also by federal laws like the filtering requirements of the E-rate and other programs that Liz mentioned, they turn to people like Peter to talk about how to do that well. So Peter, take it away.
Thank you, Reg, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have enjoyed this conference already, and these sessions that I've been in have been very informative. So what I realized, though, is that I'm not your typical presenter here at this conference. I'm not an academic. I'm not a policy wonk. I'm a practitioner, and I'm a farm boy from Iowa. So I find it interesting that I'm speaking at a Children and Screens conference, and I'm a guy that grew up with no screens, and literally no screens. We had our first TV when I was in junior high, because I had an assignment in 8th grade that I had to watch a public broadcasting system program and talk about it. And so my parents went out and bought a TV so I could watch the program, and then they promptly unplugged it and put it in the closet. So I was working with cows and horses and reading books. So, but then I wind up going to law school, and I get recruited to California, the tech capital of the world. And so my life has changed completely. And I started a law firm in 2006. It was an education law firm, and it was a typical education law firm with practice groups in labor and employment, students, special ed, business facilities, construction, and so forth. And then in 2008, just shortly after we started the firm, we got an influx of a huge number of teacher discipline cases. And they were a result of social media. Teachers cultivating relationships with students and minors that through instant message or over social media, and eventually that led to inappropriate relationships and physical contact, and we're in the position of then working with HR on what do we do with these people, and it just became very clear that technology moves at such a fast rate and the law moves at such a slow rate that we wanted to be out in front of it. And so we created this education technology practice group. And we've been doing it ever since. And as a result, because we were the first one in the space, we've been involved on the cutting edge of things like Monday. I was at an AI conference that we were sponsoring for the ACSA. ACSA is the Association of California School Administrators. The ACSA president and Google were there. The ACSA president said, we were blindsided by social media, meaning school districts. She's a superintendent. We don't want to be blindsided by AI. And so social media is obviously still, it hasn't changed. It's gotten better or worse depending on your perspective, I guess. But our practice then moved beyond the HR into a whole host of other things like contract review. I want to ask, how many of you, I know you all have smartphones and you have apps on your phone. How many of you have read the terms and conditions before you've accepted an app? Anybody? One, two. Two people. Okay. We read the terms and conditions for school districts and for teachers. And one of the areas is those apps and those applications are designed to glean information and then sell the information. Most all of these are for-profit entities. And if you can't just assume that the contract complies with the law. And what we have found is that many times teachers in a classroom will find an app that they think works great, and so they'll download it and have their students using it with no process having been followed to check the terms and conditions. What's happening with the data that's being collected? And so that's become a big part. We're also very large into preventative training. So cyber citizenship, prevention of cyberbullying is something that we do a lot of. I guess I should probably move on here. And one of the more recent ones is mental health monitoring. As Reg said, schools are being asked to do so much more than educate students like they did in the past. And this is one of them. There's been this huge increase in mental health issues of students. And so school districts, school board members, school leaders want to do something. And they want to be proactive. And so providing monitoring of social media is something that some companies sign up school districts to do. And school districts take on this this duty when they notify parents that, yeah, we're going to provide monitoring, and we're looking for triggers or words that might indicate that someone's prone to doing self-harm, but they don't have the staffing. And literally, I have districts that have said that they will do monitoring, and they only have staffing to do monitoring for like 8 hours a day. And so that creates issues for me and my clients. Okay, don't accept this and put yourself in a liability position. Another district that I'm aware of, they have a process, I guess it is, or a practice, where you need to have 21 red flags before they contact law enforcement. So 21 I don't know how they came up with that number, but because there are so many, they can't do it all the time. So this is a system that is not working appropriately now, but we're at the beginning stages of it, and schools are trying to keep up with it. Reg mentioned the social media lawsuit, and I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about this. The social media lawsuit it's like two other lawsuits that we've been involved in. They're called mass action lawsuits. They're not class action, but similar. And in this case, the social media defendants are Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, and any subsidiaries and affiliates of those. And this arises out of when the United States Surgeon General declared a national advisory on youth mental health, blaming social media in part for the growing number of youths that are experiencing depression and anxiety. And we're dealing with that in the school districts that we represent. And most recently, I've seen that 1 in 5 children aged 13 to 17 suffer from some mental health disorder. I mean, that's a phenomenal number. And as a result, a lawsuit was filed, and it's similar to the opioid and vaping lawsuits that preceded it. And so currently it was 60 last week, it's 70 this week, districts in California that have signed up for it. It's over 500 districts around the state have signed up for this lawsuit. And the hope is that these technology companies will be taken to task. You're using the judiciary. I think the last panel mentioned that sometimes you have to use the judiciary or the legal system to try and bring about change. And the hope is that by prosecuting this lawsuit against these companies, some changes will happen. Most likely, there will be a settlement of some kind, and school districts will get significant amounts of money to help address the problems that have been generated as a result of the social media use and the addictive nature of the screens. But they're seeking injunctive relief, requesting that the practices of the social media defendants be halted and modified, and also requesting financial compensation. So that is a big issue that's going on currently. And it's at the beginning stages. Some discovery is happening, but it's probably a year or so from resolution. And then I mentioned that we do a lot of preventative work and providing training for our clients, the school districts. And one of the things that we have are doing a lot of training with the social workers in the communities and in the school districts is providing tips for school districts as well as tips for parents. And while I was preparing for one of those workshops, I came across something called Parenting in the Digital Age. It's from an outfit called the Council of Europe. And a lot of these tips come from there, but they kind of jive with the tips that we were providing as well. So I would just, you see I've tabbed this quite a lot, so there's a lot of great tips in this publication called Parenting for the Digital Age, and it's from the Council of Europe. And the last thing that I think I don't know if I've stayed within my minute time or not, I think I'm pretty close. The last thing I wanted to mention, again, going to the judiciary, is that AB 2273, this is a California Assembly bill, and California has been at the forefront of trying to protect student data privacy. Much more restrictive in California than it is throughout the rest of the country, and no federal laws actually compare with what's in California. Well, that bill was recently passed by both legislative houses unanimously. Now imagine that, California Assembly and Senate both passed this unanimously, and it is a state law that would limit online business use of information that these businesses gather from users younger than 18 and require them to take steps to protect the minor's privacy. And a group called Net Choice, whose members are Google, Amazon, Meta, TikTok, and so on, went in and filed a lawsuit in federal court to have it stopped. Just 3 days ago, September 19th, the federal judge threw it out, said it was an unconstitutional law and that it inhibited it interferes with the business's use of the internet in ways that the state has failed to justify, and the state has no right to enforce obligations that would essentially press private companies into services as government censors. So a unanimously passed law in California designed to protect students in this space just got thrown out this week. So we have our work cut out for us, and I'm thankful to be here at this conference to listen to the presentations and to play a role. And again, I feel like I'm the odd duck here because I'm not a researcher, I'm not an academic, I'm a practitioner, but thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Great, thanks, Peter. And thanks, Liz and Tamara. I want to start, we've had a few kind of remarks about policy and the role, excuse me, that both education policy but also technology policy can play in helping to address these problems. And Tamara, I'd love to kind of start with you and just hear a little more from you about how we can change education policies so that media literacy, digital citizenship, some of these topics can be much more ubiquitous and across all of our states and school districts.
Sure. Well, advocates are doing great. I mean, we're really proud that for Media Literacy Now and many other of our coalition members and allies, in 10 years, which does sound like a long time, but as those of you who work in policy and legislation know, it's really not a long time to change policy. In 10 years, we've had 18 states that are making movement towards putting in their standards, putting in their legislation, putting in their policy, some attention to that we need kids to be educated in schools about social media use, about media use in general, about safety, about wellness. So we've seen a ton of progress. And in general, I've been doing this quite a while, and I've also worked in the legislative policy end of things. And when I talk to people, Democrats, Republicans, parents, teachers, students themselves, they want help. They want to learn. They want, to different degrees, people will want different types of regulation or different amounts of regulation or guardrails, as we say. But it's a ripe area, and people are really engaged. And again, it doesn't matter what political party or what you believe in philosophically. Everyone wants help, and most people acknowledge that we just need to update things. We need to be in touch with the current climate. So it's hard work, it's a slow slog, but it's ripe, and people are passionate and interested, so that gives me a lot of hope. And we've made a lot of progress, and we hope to continue that progress.
Liz, you talked about the different perspective that parents, students, and teachers have in your survey data right now. And we've kind of heard from everyone about the many hats that we expect our educators to wear that are, the task we call in our schools to carry out. I'm curious, and hopefully not putting you on the spot with this, but have you thought about what policy might make sense from the perspective of educator preparation and professional development? Is that an entry point to build awareness around this work, around things like media literacy that Tamara's talking about? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Is this question because I went over my time? Just kidding.
Yes.
I would say, have we thought about what policy change would need to look like to address some of these issues? Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't talk a lot about my organization, but that's our bread and butter, is especially federal policies. Peter mentioned state laws, though. Another pop quiz. Does anybody know how many, and this is actually probably on the low end, because my number is from last year, how many states how many state student privacy laws there are right now? Just a number. 0? Okay. I appreciate you being the first person to answer, and you're also wrong. 20? Any other guesses? 5? Okay. Well, the person who said 20, you're the closest, although you're still very wrong. It's 140. There are 140 state student privacy laws right now on the books. The main federal student privacy law has been around since the 70s. So I think what's interesting is we talk about what new laws do we need, what new regulations do we need. Sometimes I wonder, is our laws really the problem? We actually have a pretty wild patchwork happening right now. And so what I've been leaning more on is what do we already have that we can just do a better job of applying and enforcing. So I'm gonna not answer your question exactly, but I did talk about this in my remarks. I think a big place that we need to focus is on civil rights laws. These go back to the 60s. I'm literally talking about desegregation all the way to allowing girls to play sports. And there's a lot that is relevant. And so one concept that maybe a couple, if Reg doesn't cut off my mic, there's this concept of disparate treatment. Are y'all familiar with that? It's a common civil rights claim. And so what it says is that you can't treat someone differently based on their race, based on their sex, based on whether they have a disability. A data point that I haven't shared is in our research, we asked teachers, does your school analyze data to try and predict certain outcomes for students? And so a common thing that schools do is they look at data to try and predict which students might be at risk of dropping out. 58% of teachers say that their school does that. From separate reporting, we know that sometimes those algorithms can include race. They can include sex. They can include disability. And maybe you're thinking, well, that's just to help. Like, what could go wrong? Well, from other reporting, we know that those algorithms are less effective for Black and Hispanic kids. We know that they haven't actually moved the needle in terms of closing racial gaps. And so if you're going to use that type of information to target specific students, so this is different than looking at aggregate data to see how different groups of students perform at the aggregate. We're talking about we're going to treat Chris differently than Reg, than Peter. That's a really high bar if you're going to account for those things. It has to be very narrowly tailored. It has to serve a government interest, and you have to have evidence that it works. And at a minimum, you have to have evidence that shows that it doesn't make things worse. Another concept that I think we're really pushing on is disparate impact. So that's when you have a neutral policy, you're applying things in the same way, and yet you're still seeing certain groups of students experiencing disproportionate and negative harm. An example of this is students using devices provided by the school. So we know from our research that the majority of monitoring that happens, like Peter was talking about, happens on school-issued devices. And there are certain groups of kids who essentially come from families with more resources where they have their own device, and so they can subvert that monitoring. So they can afford privacy, whereas their peers can't. And so all the negative consequences that I talked about discipline, about law enforcement contact, about being outed, those are going to fall more on those protected classes of kids because they're also more likely to rely on school-issued devices. So that feels like a neutral policy. We're just monitoring all school-issued devices in the same way. But because there are certain groups of students who are more likely to rely on them, that they are also more likely to experience the negative effects. So Reg, I know I didn't exactly answer your question, but that's where my mind is really going is, and because these protections have been in place for so long, schools have capacity. They've been required to have a Title IX coordinator and a coordinator to work on Title II, which is focused on students with disabilities. They have policies, they're required to post them. And just in our informal scan, and maybe Peter, you could work with some of your clients, they don't talk about these issues. They don't talk about how they're applying existing efforts to prevent discrimination against students to the digital age. And I think that's where I'd really like to see the field go.
Great, thank you. Peter, when you take on a new district that is, maybe starting new technology initiatives, or maybe they've been a long time user, as most districts are, of technology, what tips do you immediately bring to them? What advice do you bring to them to help navigate that?
It's such a wide range, but first is one of the things I mentioned during my comments is, do you have programs, apps being used in the classroom that have not been properly vetted? And almost always the answer is yes. Now, we've had several districts recently actually put a process in place that if a teacher finds something they want to use, they have to notify the district office. The district office then sends it to us, and we review the terms and conditions to find out if they're compliant. If they're not, then we negotiate with the provider to add terms that make it legally compliant, and then they use it. It slows the process down a bit, but it provides protection. But the vast majority of school districts don't do that. So that's one of the things that we definitely advise. Another thing that ties in with social media is for school districts to know all the social media pages that are affiliated with your district and have access to them, because say you have 40 school sites. Each school site has their own social media page. They may have 3 or 4 social media pages because they could be on Twitter, they could be on Facebook, they could be on Snapchat. And you don't know as a district or district leadership who is running those Facebook pages or those social media pages. And sometimes they get hijacked. And then we get a call at 10:30 at night that the music club website or Facebook page has been hijacked and there's racially insensitive or hate speech being put on it, and the assistant superintendent who calls me has no idea how to get a hold of that page or even who's running it and what the passwords are. And so that is something we have seen a large increase in school district affiliated social media pages being hijacked and used for nefarious purposes. So that's one of the tips that I always tell them. Know the web pages that you have or the social media pages that you have, and know who to contact if something happens with them. And these things are not secure. You may think you're secure and you may have a password that is strong, but I can tell you, just as an example, during COVID, most of our school boards went to meeting virtually. And so they had set up a Zoom account or whatever they were. And I had a school board from the community right next door to where I live. Their meeting was hijacked by some group in Australia, and they could not get their meeting back. And so you be as careful as you can be, but just know that you're dealing with a medium that we don't have total control over, and then put yourself in the best position that you can to be able to remedy whenever something bad happens.
Tamara, you mentioned in your presentation that there are a lot of different terms associated with your work, digital citizenship, digital welfare, social media literacy, certainly with 50 states, thousands of school districts and a federal government, the policy can look different in the media literacy space. I'm just curious if you wouldn't mind diving a little bit deeper on that as policymakers try to sort that out.
Sure. And also even with researchers. And I think yesterday somebody talked about wanting to, or maybe it was Wednesday, wanting to have one term also for social media research, TDM or SM, or there's different abbreviations in the research community, in the policy community as well. So with all the different media literacy, social media literacy, digital literacy, data literacy, that's a little bit different, but there are just so many terms. I find that, yes, it can be helpful to have the same terms to access the same resources and the same research, and I think the research world probably has those issues as well, but we're not going to make that be an obstacle. I think the people who are involved under whatever terminology, whatever they're calling it, really want the same thing. So we're trying to form coalitions and find common ground with everyone who's interested in the same things. If they're really adamant about calling it their thing, then, probably not going to get them to change. But if we can all be on the same page as to what we want, I think that's the important thing.
Can I add something to what?
Please.
Just to reinforce what you're saying. So we asked, in our survey, we asked students, what are the kinds of things that you'd be interested in? And you see, it's like 80-90% are interested in the kinds of things that Tamara's talking about. And then we asked teachers, what percentage of your schools actually address these? And then you see the bar just drop off. So I just wanted to reinforce, and we talked about sort of the next generation of AI and some of the risks associated with that. So, are you interested in knowing how to be able to tell the difference between something generated by a person or generated by AI? And yes. We're like, schools, are you doing that? No. So just to reiterate the importance of what you're talking about, and that as new technologies are introduced, that demand is only increasing, and from students themselves.
Thank you. Good point.
Okay, I want to just transition now to some questions from all of you. We have about 10 minutes to take a few questions, and we'll be able to take more if you're concise. So I'm going to begin over here, and we'll go kind of back and forth. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Dimitri Christakis from Children and Screens. Peter, you were disparaging yourself for being a practitioner. We actually need you, so thank you for the work you do. Most of us are in the ivory tower, and we don't do anything. So, But I thought I heard you say that you were confident that these school boards were going to get money as part of this settlement against social media. And I'm wondering where your optimism for that comes from, given the Supreme Court ruling, given the California ruling, given what seems to be a very broad interpretation of 230, which obviously was written before any of this. I mean, I can't imagine it would be written the same today, but nevertheless, it's out there. So is this just plaintiff lawyer optimism, or is there anything I don't know that you're going to prevail somehow?
First of all, I'm a defense lawyer, although in this particular case, my clients are plaintiffs. And because I defend school districts, basically, those are my clients. I don't think I said I'm optimistic, but I said the most likely result is that school districts will get money. And I base that based on the two other mass action lawsuits that we've seen recently, one which is opioids and the other one is vaping. And eventually, you go through discovery, you get, if the case doesn't get thrown out completely, then these companies don't want to go to trial because that will be a media circus and they're going to throw money at it and they have lots of money to throw. So I base it on my experience in the other mass action lawsuits that most likely, and I guess I should also, I use this as a chance to talk about litigation, of all the lawsuits that get filed, 99% or maybe 95% of them settle. Some get thrown out, very few make it to trial, and even some that make it to trial settle before the case is over, before the trial's over. And so if I am optimistic, it would be that I know that most cases settle, and I think there are some good grounds for holding these companies liable, and I would expect that they're probably not going to want to take the case to trial.
But that was the case with other of these. I mean, I appreciate it, what you're saying, but if they lose here, if they settle this, they're going to be settling lots of lawsuits around for the same reasons, right?
Well, possibly, but that's I guess the beauty from their perspective of a mass action lawsuit. You currently have over 500 school districts included. If the districts don't sign up, they don't get the money. I mean, we had a lot of districts that did not sign up for the vaping lawsuit. And then when they settled and Juul went bankrupt, our districts, depending on their ADA, would get anywhere from $45,000, $50,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars as a result of the settlement that they can then use to negate the impacts of the vaping. Same thing here with social media. We're getting a lot more districts that are signing up now because they saw that they missed out on the vaping. And so they're thinking, and probably because there's these impacts on students are front and center. I mean, you're dealing with students with mental health issues at a rate that they've never dealt with before, and you've got the Surgeon General saying that social media companies had something to do with it. So why not get in, and hopefully you can get something. You're not out anything, I guess is the, and my clients get involved. I don't want to misinterpret or mislead anybody that we're actually handling that litigation. It's a plaintiff's law firm that is handling the litigation. They contact us because we represent 500 school districts in California, and they want access to our clients. So we talk to our clients about the pros and cons, and then the school boards ultimately make a decision of whether or not they want in or not.
Sorry, just had a very quick follow-up to his question. You wouldn't settle before discovery, would you?
I'm sorry?
You wouldn't settle before discovery, would you, or is that a possibility? Because that's such an opportunity to get such important information in the public.
Typically, something comes out in discovery that causes a defendant to want to settle, not necessarily beforehand.
Good, thanks. So over here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this conversation. My name is Amy Konwinski. I run a nonprofit in the Midwest called Smart Gen Society, and our entire goal is to have safety, privacy, and open communication between all the stakeholders. One of the things that we're really hearing educating over 100,000 students in 16 states over the last few years is students' right to free speech and their right to openly engage with social media on their terms. What we're finding is many schools that are private schools, specifically religious institutions, aren't allowing students to be on their own private social media on their own time, talking about their gender expression or sexual identities. I want to just get your opinion on students' right to that free speech and being able to see where those districts are allowed to tell them what they can do if it's a private institution compared to public institutions, and just kind of your thoughts on that.
Okay. I'm assuming that was directed to me.
Whichever, no, Peter, I'd love
Go
it.
for it.
Some of you
I
want to
nominate
jump
you.
in, that's fine. Well, there is a difference between a public school and a private school. And if you send your children to private school, you basically are signing off on their rules and regulations. And you're always free to pull the kids out and put them in a public school if you don't like the rules. So I think suing a private school for inhibiting a student's free expression on social media when they've agreed to do that by coming to that school would be a hard one to win. In the public school context, we see students expressing themselves all over the place, and sometimes it's in bullying and hate speech, and if there is a nexus between the social media expression and the school, such that it causes a disruption of the education process, is really the term of art, then the student can be subjected to discipline from the school district. But if not, if there's no nexus and it doesn't cause a disruption, and we see a lot of what most people would consider to be not very nice interactions on social media, but it has no impact at the school site. If that's the case, then there's nothing that the school district can do. So students can express themselves. It's when it causes a disruption that it's a problem.
Yeah,
Thank you.
over here.
My question is for Elizabeth Laird, and you were talking about the monitoring systems that schools use for students. And I was wondering, you said something about not keeping them safe with a little bit is my intuition, but I haven't seen good data on that either way. From what I see, the companies will talk about how many cases of these, trigger words or whatever they catch. I mean, I'd be really interested to see before the software is implemented and after the software is implemented, how many, events were there of various situations where children are actually at risk. Are you aware of any data that looks at that and that actually, quantifies the effectiveness of these tools?
I'm aware that there is no independent evidence to support the company's claims. And that's not just me saying that. There's forthcoming research from other folks who are going to say the same thing. And where there, as a general body of research, where there is more accurate information about predicting whether a student, and the one that comes up the most is that they may harm themselves, where there is evidence that you can do that, it's in the type of information that schools don't have. It's in your personal medical records. It's are you expressing depressive symptoms? Have you tried to hurt yourself before? Like, that's actually where there's some evidence, although it's still not particularly pronounced. That's the only place where there's evidence that you can even do what these companies are saying they claim to be able to do. And I think that's something that a lot of folks don't realize because they hear these stories of, just in the nick of time because we were able to do this. And then when you try and probe for more details, ironically, they'll cite privacy as a reason they can't tell you more about it. So I think we're trying to raise awareness of, one, there's no independent evidence that any of these tools work. But I hope our evidence shows that they do introduce new safety risks. And I think it's often presented as, do you pick privacy or do you pick safety? And well, I'm trying to say that's a false choice. And for a lot of people, privacy is safety.
Thank you.
Yeah, over here.
Hi, I'm Javier Agüera. I'm a social entrepreneur also with the Berkman Center at Harvard. I have a question for Elizabeth, but maybe for all of you. Have you seen any research that explores whether subjecting kids to surveillance at home or in the school affects their attitudes later as adults towards accepting surveillance from the government or from companies?
Yeah. First of all, I love the work that y'all do, so happy to take a first stab at this. We haven't asked that question exactly. I do think the other piece that we're trying to educate on is some of the things that I talked about. You could potentially at least make those things less bad. Like, you could decide you're not going to punish kids based on this. You could decide you're not going to routinize law enforcement's access to this information. You could potentially look at your algorithm to see how it might be inadvertently or in some cases intentionally targeting LGBTQ+ students. The thing that you will never get around, and is just a feature of surveillance, is that people change the way that they behave. They act differently. They may not access certain things. They may not express themselves in such a free way. And that very much comes through in our research. And not only that, but a student with a disability, is actually more likely to express if they don't feel comfortable expressing themselves online when they know what they're doing is being monitored. And it's especially problematic when we're talking about minors and we're talking about a context where that's what you want kids to do. You want them to express themselves, you want them to make mistakes and learn from them. And so when schools are deciding whether or not to use this software, I feel like they're making a decision about whether this tool, in addition to the harms that I talked about, does this undermine the very mission of your organization?
Can I add something? I think I saw a report from the Brennan Center for Justice that might have addressed this. I'm not sure, but try it.
Great, thanks, Tamara. We have time for one more quick question, and then I hope come up afterwards. I hope our panelists will have a few more minutes afterwards.
Great, and thank you. Amazing, excellent panel. Thank you to everybody. And a great moderator also.
A little strict, though, if you ask me.
So I just want to, I'm Cindy Russell, I'm with Physicians for Safe Technology, and our group is looking at both the mental health and also the physical health effects of this digital technology. And, you know, this entire conference has been really amazing, and just considering all of the issues with this technology. We look at the radio frequency radiation, but also addiction, commodification, the issues trying to control EdTech, which have come up, and the apps. You've got the power, and also we don't really know the educational benefits of this technology that took over. I've experienced this with my daughter. No tech, a high tech. I grew up with no tech. I'm a physician. I'm a surgeon. I can do everything, and I have a brain, I can think. And it seems to me that we're losing a lot of brain power by using this technology. And why aren't schools going back to actually some of the basics, especially in the early grades? Reading, writing, arithmetic. Let's go back to books, and let's teach them cursive handwriting. When I got involved with this issue, I started with toxins. They were going to put a cell tower in my daughter's school. I started looking at the effects of radio frequency radiation. One of the things I found was that 49 states were phasing out cursive handwriting. And I mean, I don't have a PhD in it. I'm not a neuropsychologist, but I'm like, why would you do that? And it seems like big tech has come in and said, you're not going to need to know how to read the Constitution of the United States. This is a huge problem that is not just the Wi-Fi radiation effects, which there's abundant literature now on, which is being, not realized, but just this mental health effects. Why can't we just say no to big tech and start having tech breaks with a BRAKE? Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can anybody answer if people are trying to take a break from tech and talk about in terms of media literacy, let's not just see how to handle all these problems. Let's just try to reduce the use of tech and reduce our dependency on it and go back to books, which are actually good.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we're at the end of time, so not to cut you off, but I also don't want to be the bad moderator that slowed down this
No,
entire
you're not.
conference.
Reg, hi, Chris Perry, Children's Screens Executive Director. And I just wanted to flag for folks on the panel and in the audience today, in May of last year, we hosted an online 5-day EdTech retreat. And it's on our website, and we went beyond where you went today and talked mostly about pedagogical value of any of the products that are in any classrooms anywhere in the world, and it is very low. So what was really interesting today was big conversation about the floor, safety, privacy, and civil rights, in a sense like protecting children from discrimination and harm. But this retreat that we did talked about what if there were high quality ed tech products in the classrooms, and what if they enhance teaching, and what if. So I just really wanted to let you all know there's like a whole other conversation about ed tech that goes beyond safety and security, which is so critical, to what if it were enhancing children's educational experience. So those things both exist now. We have this, and on our website you can see that retreat. So anyway, thanks for running a great panel. Reg.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to our panelists.